I was left with nothing after a surprise heirloom reveal. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. When my grandmother's lawyer said my name, I genuinely thought he'd misread it. Instead of leaving me the house on Maple Street, the house everyone in my family called my future, the will gave it to my older cousin Mark, and I got nothing. No house, no savings tied to it. Not even the old sapphire brooch I watched my grandmother, Eleanor, pin to her dress every Sunday. Just a polite line about her enduring affection. And then the papers moved on. I sat at the end of the long conference table in Attorney Patel's downtown office, fingers sticky from the cheap coffee I hadn't finished. Mark sat near the middle, in one of those leather chairs that advertise power, wearing a navy blazer he definitely couldn't afford 2 years ago. My mother, Victoria, perched beside him, hand on his sleeve like she was steadying herself, but her eyes were bright, hungry. "I'm sorry, Jamie," Patel said, voice soft but professional. "Per this executed will, the property at 114 Maple, along with its contents, is deeded to Mark Walters in full." The words sounded like they were coming through water. Maple Street was more than a house. It was the place I'd hidden from my parents' arguments, the creaky staircase I'd slid down on cardboard, the garden Eleanor taught me to weed properly because roots tell you who you are. It was where I'd moved in for 8 months to help her when her knees went bad, driving her to medical appointments between shifts at the bookstore. Everyone knew the plan. Eleanor said it on birthdays, in front of the family. "Jamie will have the house," she'd say, ruffling my hair even when I was old enough to hate it. "They're the only one who loves it like I do." I built my grown-up life around that promise, staying in town, taking the low-paying job I liked instead of chasing something flashier somewhere else. So when Patel finished reading, and there was no Maple Street, no brooch, no nothing with my name on it, I wasn't just hurt. I could feel the floor of my future tipping away beneath me while everyone pretended this was normal. I was suddenly, terrifyingly sure that someone had stolen my life in ink. If you grew up in a family where nothing was certain, you cling hard to the few things that are. For me, certainty was a peeling white house with blue shutters and a crooked 114 nailed to the front post. Maple Street was Eleanor's house in the legal sense, but it felt like it belonged to our entire history. Eleanor used to tell me how she bought it with my grandfather's life insurance after he died young. "This roof is the only reason we survived, Jamie," she'd say, tapping the ceiling with a broom handle when it leaked. "And one day it'll keep you safe too." She never said that to Mark. With him, it was always jokes about his next big business idea or how he'd upgrade someday to something in the hills. Victoria's relationship to the house was complicated. She hated the drive to the old neighborhood, hated that Eleanor wouldn't cash out when the market spiked. "Mom, you're sitting on a gold mine and living like it's 1978, I heard her say once, standing in the doorway with grocery bags in my arms. Eleanor just smiled and said, "You can't measure a home in dollars, Vicky." Mark treated the place like a prop. He'd bring friends over to take moody photos on the porch swing and then bail before dishes. I was the one who learned which radiator banged the loudest, which window stuck, how to fix the temperamental boiler by kicking it in just the right spot. When Eleanor's arthritis got worse, I moved into the small back bedroom and gave up my studio apartment, telling myself it was temporary. A month before she died, we sat at the kitchen table with tea, the formica surface worn smooth from decades of elbows. "Everything's in writing with Patel now," she told me, sliding her wrinkled hand over mine. "You won't have to fight anyone. The house is yours." I didn't realize then just how many people had other plans for that promise. Looking back, the first red flag should have been the locks. 2 weeks after Eleanor went into the hospital for the last time, I drove over after my shift to pick up her favorite cardigan and a framed photo she'd asked for. My key stuck halfway in the front door. When it finally turned, the deadbolt felt wrong, like someone had replaced it but tried to pretend they hadn't. Inside, the house smelled different. Less like dust and lavender, more like lemon cleaner and something chemical. Boxes had appeared in the living room, neatly labeled in Victoria's careful handwriting: kitchen, sell, books, donate, misc. Eleanor wasn't dead, just in a hospital bed 3 miles away, and already her life was getting sorted by market value. "Mom?" I called, heart pounding. Victoria's voice floated from the dining room. "Oh, Jamie, you scared me." She stepped out, wiping her hands. "I had the locks updated. You know, safety. Don't worry, you're still on the list." On the list. Like access to the house was some VIP event. A few days later, I overheard Victoria on the phone in the hospital hallway, hissing into her cell. "We need to get this done before more complications," she said. Yes, yes, I know about the witnesses. Just send the papers." When she saw me, she pasted on a smile. "Just insurance stuff," she lied. Mark suddenly started showing up in nicer clothes, waving car keys with a logo I recognized from luxury ads. "Got a good deal," he said when I raised an eyebrow. "Networking pays off." I told myself I was being paranoid. Grief makes everything sharp and suspicious. Of course they were dealing with logistics. Eleanor was old, and there was so much to handle. I clung to what she'd said at that kitchen table, the way her eyes had crinkled. It wasn't until I saw a manila envelope from Patel vanish off Eleanor's nightstand that my doubts started turning into something uglier. The day of the reveal felt less like a funeral and more like a performance. Patel's office sat on the 21st floor of a glass building downtown, the kind of place that made you feel poor just stepping out of the elevator. The conference room had a wall of windows and a polished table long enough to land a plane on. Someone had thoughtfully set out bottled water, and a plate of cookies like this was a PDA meeting, not the dissection of a life. Victoria wore her best black dress, the one she'd worn to Eleanor's actual funeral 2 weeks before. Mark had on that same navy blazer, plus a watch that definitely hadn't existed last Christmas. A couple of more distant relatives dotted the chairs. My Aunt Beth, who mostly stayed quiet, and Uncle Rob, already half drunk on grief or something stronger from his thermos. Patel shuffled the papers, adjusted his glasses, and began. There were standard legal phrases, paragraphs about debts, modest accounts, minor bequests. My name came up a few times attached to small things, some old cookbooks, a modest checking balance. I waited for the rhythm to change, for the words, "property at 114, Maple Street" to Jamie Collins, like a chorus we'd all rehearsed. Instead, Patel cleared his throat. "The residence at 114, Maple Street, including furnishings and personal property contained therein, I leave to my grandson, Mark Walters." My ears rang. It was like someone had cut out a piece of the world, and the air rushed in to fill it. I stared at Patel. "There has to be a mistake," I heard myself say. She told me. She told me the house." Victoria's hand landed on my forearm, squeezing just a bit too hard. "Jamie, sweetheart," she murmured. "Let Mr. Patel finish." Mark didn't even bother to hide his smirk. "We can talk after," he said, like he was soothing a child. By the time Patel finished, my inheritance amounted to a used car's worth of cash and some sentimental clutter. No house, no brooch, no security. And in the stunned silence that followed, Victoria said the sentence that made the room tilt sideways. "Don't be dramatic," she said, voice cool enough to frost glass. "Your grandmother never promised you anything legally, Jamie." The word legally snapped at my ankles. "She told me." I replied, hearing the wobble in my own voice. "You were there, Mom. On my birthday last year. She said the house was mine. She said she'd told Patel." Victoria smiled the way people do when customer service calls are being recorded. "Old people say a lot of things," she said. "What matters is what's on paper," and clearly she changed her mind. Uncle Rob snorted. "I always thought Mark should get the place," he mumbled. "He'll actually use it." I stared at him. "I lived there," I said. "I took care of her. I slept on that lumpy mattress for almost a year while you all visited once a month and brought supermarket flowers." "Jamie," Mark said, putting his hands up like he was a saint. "This isn't my fault. I didn't write the will. If Gran wanted you to have more, she would have done it." Patel looked uncomfortable, shuffling papers again. "I can assure you this is the most recent executed document," he said. "Dated 3 weeks before Ms. Eleanor's passing." 3 weeks. That was when Eleanor had been on oxygen, drifting in and out, asking me the same questions twice in an hour. The idea of her sitting upright and rationally reworking her will didn't fit, but the room had already decided the narrative. By the time we left, my head pounded. Victoria walked out with Mark, tucked between them like I was the extra relative tagging along. In the elevator lobby, she turned to me. "You still have your job," she said. "You pay your own rent. You'll be fine. Mark has opportunities. The house will help him start a family." I almost choked. You're really going to stand there and tell me this is fair? She gave me a tired smile. Life isn't fair, honey. Be grateful for what you got. It wasn't until I got home and opened my banking app that the phrase, "what you got," started to look even more suspicious. The deposit from the estate was smaller than Patel had estimated. Not by a lot, just enough to be annoying, like someone skimming foam off a latte. I told myself it was taxes, fees, whatever. But once you notice one crack in the story, your eyes start hunting for more. 2 nights later, I was scrolling through old emails, half tempted to write Eleanor like she was still there. Instead, I searched her name in my inbox and found something I'd forgotten, a message from her sent 6 months earlier. Subject line, "For when I forget." In the body, she'd written, "Jamie, if my brain goes scrambled, remember I told Patel you get the house. Mark can have the stocks. He'll like that better. The house is too full of ghosts for him." Attached was a scanned handwritten note, dated and initialed, repeating the same sentiment. I stared at it, while rising. Whatever happened 3 weeks before she died, this was what she'd wanted when she was still fully herself. The next day, I printed the email at work and walked it over to Patel's office on my lunch break. The receptionist eyed my bookstore name tag, but took the envelope. 20 minutes later, Patel ushered me into a smaller meeting room. "This is interesting," he said, adjusting his glasses as he read. "I don't recall seeing this letter before your grandmother's final revision. Can you explain how she went from this to cutting me out completely?" I asked. "Because 3 weeks before she died, she couldn't even remember which nurse brought her pudding." Patel hesitated. "I can only speak to what I witnessed. She was frail but lucid the day she signed. Your mother and cousin were present as informal support." My stomach dropped. "They were in the room when she changed the will?" "Yes," he said slowly. "They insisted she wanted to simplify things. I had no reason to doubt them." Walking back to the bookstore, the city noise felt muffled, like someone had thrown a blanket over the world. That night, when I saw Mark's new kitchen posted on Instagram with the caption, "New Beginnings at Maple," something in me finally snapped. The photo made me drop my phone. Mark had framed it like a lifestyle ad. Sunlight streaming onto the old farmhouse sink. Eleanor's chipped blue mugs lined up like quaint props. A bottle of expensive champagne sweating on the counter where she'd taught me to roll out pie crust. His caption read, "Gran always wanted this place full of life. Here's to you, Ellie." The comments were full of heart emojis and people saying how proud she'd be. Proud of him, the guy who'd barely shown up unless there were holiday photos to post. I sat on my mattress in my tiny one-bedroom, surrounded by IKEA particle board, and felt my chest buzz with something that wasn't just grief anymore. I started with the county property records website. It was supposed to be a doom scroll distraction, but then I saw it. A transfer filed 1 week before Eleanor's death. The deed for 114 Maple had been moved into the name MVM Holdings LLC. Mailing address, Victoria's condo. Registered agent, Mark Walters. I read it 3 times. The will had left the house to Mark personally, but on paper, the property already belonged to an LLC they controlled. Why would you inherit something you already owned? The next day, I printed the deed and went back to Patel. "How does this make sense?" I demanded, slapping the papers on his desk. He frowned, eyes scanning fast. "This transfer predates the will," he murmured. "Was I informed?" He trailed off, clearly realizing he hadn't been. "Jamie, this is unusual." "Unusual how?" "In most cases, a quitclaim deed like this would at least be discussed during estate planning. Moving the property into an LLC changes how it's taxed, who benefits, who's protected from creditors." He looked up at me. "Did your grandmother tell you she was doing this?" I shook my head, feeling the room tilt again. "She told me the opposite. She said the house would be mine." Patel pressed his lips together. "Then the question becomes not just what happened, but who really drove these changes." And for the first time, someone other than me seemed willing to say Victoria's name out loud. Once you start pulling at one thread, the whole sweater comes apart. I called Aunt Beth, the quiet one from the will reading, and asked if we could grab coffee. We met at a dingy diner halfway between our apartments. She looked tired, the way everyone did after Eleanor's death, but there was something else in her eyes too. Guilt, maybe. "I always thought the house would go to you," she said after I laid out what I'd found. "Mom never shut up about it. Mark hates old plumbing." "So what happened?" I asked. "Because according to the county, Mom and Mark moved the house into some company before Gran even died. Beth stirred her coffee, staring at the swirling cream. Victoria called me last fall, she said. She said Mom was being unrealistic about her assets and that there were debts. Medical bills, some old loan your grandfather supposedly took out. She said if they didn't act fast, the state might force a sale. I frowned. Patel never mentioned any of that. She said Patel was dragging his feet. Beth continued. She asked if I'd be willing to come over when a notary visited, as a witness. I couldn't make it that day. Work. She said it was fine, that she'd handle it. Later, in my apartment, I went through Eleanor's old files again. There it was, a thick envelope labeled Equity Line, opened and resealed with a piece of tape. The statements showed a line of credit taken out against the house 5 years ago, small at first, then bigger, then huge. Draw after draw. The signatures at the bottom looked like Eleanor's, but shakier, almost guided. The last page was a transfer form authorizing changes to the account's mailing address. The handwriting on that line was smoother, faster, and very clearly not hers. The new address was Victoria's condo. Staring at the page, I realized this wasn't just about favoritism or family politics anymore. Someone had turned my grandmother's house into their personal ATM, and I was pretty sure I knew exactly who. I didn't sleep much after that. My nights turned into a loop. County records, bank statements, old emails, scrolling through photos Mark had forgotten to scrub from his socials. Every time I thought I'd hit the bottom, another detail surfaced. One of Eleanor's neighbors, Mrs. Alvarez, remembered a day a few months before Eleanor's last hospital stay. Your mama came with a man in a suit, she told me, leaning on her cane by the chain-link fence. They were here a long time. Your grandma looked confused when I waved. She asked me later what she'd signed. I recorded her, with her permission, my phone shaking in my hand. Patel agreed to look at the documents I'd gathered. He called me into his office the following week. Jamie, he said carefully, I'm not a handwriting expert, but these signatures on the later documents, they're inconsistent with earlier ones. And if your grandmother was already cognitively impaired, there could be grounds to challenge the validity of the transfer and the will revision. Meaning? I asked. Meaning, he said. If you wanted, you could open a formal contest. But it will be ugly, expensive, public, and it will put you directly at odds with your mother and cousin. I thought about Eleanor's email, for when I forget. Thought about Victoria telling me to be grateful for what you got, while standing on a financial crime scene. Thought about Mark's caption, here's to you, Ellie, over a kitchen he'd essentially stolen. What happens if I don't challenge it? I asked. Patel sighed. Then the deed stands. The will stands. Your mother and cousin retain control of the property and any equity associated with it. You move on with what you've been given. Move on. That phrase sounded like sand in my teeth. I walked out of his office into the blinding afternoon sun, my phone buzzing with a text from Victoria. Family dinner Sunday. At the new house. Don't make things awkward. In that moment, I realized my decision wouldn't stay theoretical much longer. I almost didn't go to that dinner. Every cell in my body screamed to stay home, order takeout, and pretend my family lived on some distant planet. But avoiding them wouldn't change what they'd done. And part of me needed to see the house again, even if it had been rebranded as Mark's new place. They'd redone the front yard. Eleanor's wild roses were gone, replaced by neat lines of decorative grasses and a tasteful stone path. It looked like a real estate listing, not a home. Mark answered the door with a beer in his hand. Hey, little cuz, he said. Welcome to the Walters estate. In the dining room, Eleanor's table had been sanded and stained darker. Victoria had set it with new dishes, sleek and white. This feels so much more modern, doesn't it? She said, kissing my cheek airily. Mom would have loved seeing the place updated. I bit back the reply. She loved the creaky floors and the ugly curtains, and sat down. Halfway through the meal, Victoria cleared her throat. So, Jamie, she said, sliding an envelope across the table, I know you've been upset. I get it, change is hard. But Mark and I want to help you let go of all this negativity. Inside was a check. A generous sum, considering my bookstore salary. Not remotely close to the value of the house. This is a goodwill gesture, Mark said. You could pay off your student loans, maybe upgrade your place. We just want everyone to move forward. And in return? I asked, my voice paper thin. Victoria's smile tightened. We'd like you to sign an agreement, she said. Just confirming you accept the terms of the will and property transfer. No challenges, no lawyers, no making this into a circus. It's better for everyone. The room seemed to shrink around me. This wasn't comfort. It was hush money dressed up in family concern. I was still staring at the pen when a memory of Eleanor's shaky voice cut through the noise like a knife. I could hear her, so clearly it hurt. You won't have to fight anyone. The house is yours. The way she'd squeezed my hand, as if trying to press the promise into my bones. Victoria must have seen something change in my face, because her tone sharpened. Jamie, she said quietly, don't be foolish. You're not in a position to take us on. Lawyers cost money. We have documentation. I looked at her, at the woman who'd raised me, who had once worked double shifts to keep the lights on, and saw a stranger who decided that security meant stepping on whoever she needed to. I'm going to have Patel review whatever you want me to sign, I said, sliding the envelope back. If it's really as harmless as you say, you shouldn't mind. Mark swore under his breath. This is exactly the drama Gran hated, he snapped. You're twisting everything. She wanted things simple. She trusted Mom and me. Funny, I said, heart pounding, because she told me she trusted Patel, not you. The rest of dinner was tight-lipped and brittle. When I left, Victoria hugged me stiffly at the door. You're making a mistake, she whispered into my ear. Don't turn this family into a battlefield. But the battlefield had been there for months. I just finally noticed the landmines. Back at home, I spread every document I had across my kitchen table. The email from Eleanor, the property transfer, the equity line statements, Mrs. Alvarez's recorded story. I took photos, backed them up to the cloud, and wrote down a timeline until my eyes blurred. Then I sent Patel a single-line email. I want to move forward with a formal challenge. The next morning, Victoria texted me a photo of a lawyer's business card and a threat disguised as concern. You don't want to do this, her text read. Once petitions are filed, everything becomes public record. Your job, your finances, everything will be scrutinized. People talk. Think about your future before you ruin ours. It was oddly comforting, in a way. Only scared people threaten you with things you've already lived through. I worked in a bookstore, for God's sake. My finances were already a joke. There was nothing for the world to expose except my overdraft fees. Patel filed the initial paperwork within a week. Copies went out to all interested parties, including Victoria and Mark. I didn't have to wait long for the storm. Mark called first. What the hell are you doing? He demanded. You're accusing Mom of elder abuse. Do you even understand how serious that is? I'm accusing the situation of not making sense, I said. If you two did nothing wrong, the court will see that, right? He cursed. You're ungrateful. We tried to help you, and you're spitting in our faces. Help me with what? I asked. Forgetting that Gran's equity line paid off your credit cards? Or that the house accidentally ended up in your LLC while she was too sick to stand? Silence crackled on the line, then the call dropped. Patel scheduled a mediation session as a first step, hoping to avoid a drawn-out court fight. Sometimes, he said, once everyone is in the same room with documents on the table, people realize it's better to negotiate than escalate. I wasn't interested in a quiet payout this time. I wanted the truth documented somewhere other than my ribcage. Still, mediation meant everyone would have to respond, on the record, to the timeline I'd pieced together. In the days before the meeting, I vacillated between nausea and a cold, focused anger that made everything else feel unimportant. On the morning of mediation, as I walked into the neutral downtown office with my folder of evidence, I didn't expect the extra person sitting beside Victoria and Mark. It was Aunt Beth. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, dark circles smudged under her eyes. When she saw me, she gave a tiny nod, like we were in on some secret together. Victoria's jaw tightened. Clearly, Beth's presence had not been part of her plan. The mediator, a calm woman with silver hair and an air of weary patience, began by laying out ground rules. No shouting, no interruptions, everyone would get a chance to speak. Patel summarized the basic dispute: timing of the will, the house transfer, questions about Eleanor's mental capacity. Before we begin, Patel said, I'd like to enter several documents into the record. He slid copies of Eleanor's email, the equity line statements, the deed transfer, and Mrs. Alvarez's witness statement across the table. These raised concerns about whether Ms. Eleanor fully understood the implications of the transactions executed shortly before her passing. Victoria's lawyer, because of course she had one now, leaned forward. "My client categorically denies any wrongdoing," he said. "She acted under her mother's explicit instructions to secure the property and ensure it remained within the family." Funny definition of within the family, I muttered, when the one person she promised it to got cut out. To my surprise, Beth spoke up. "Mom never talked about LLCs," she said quietly. "She hated that kind of stuff. She told me more than once the house was for Jamie. She said Mark would find something fancy in the suburbs." Victoria shot her a look that could melt steel. "You're misremembering," she snapped. "Mom changed her mind when she saw how much work the house needed." Patel tapped the deed. "The transfer to MVM Holdings coincides suspiciously with large draws on the equity line," he said. "Those funds went where exactly?" Victoria's lawyer cleared his throat. "To necessary expenses," he said. "Updates to the property, outstanding medical costs, family support." "Family support?" I repeated. "You mean Mark's maxed out credit cards and your kitchen remodel?" The mediator raised a hand, but the air was already crackling. Then Beth pulled a small notebook from her bag and changed everything. "I wasn't going to say anything," she began, voice shaking. "But I can't keep pretending I don't know things." She opened the notebook, pages fluttering. "I was with Mom the day after the notary came. She was upset. She thought she'd signed papers to help with bills, not to give up the house." Victoria's face flushed. "That's ridiculous." She knew exactly what she was doing. Beth ignored her. "I wrote down what she said that day," she continued. "Date, time, everything. I work in healthcare. We document things." She said, "Vicky rushed me. I didn't want to bother Jamie with money stuff." She was crying, tore. The room went very still. Patel quietly slid Beth's notebook toward the mediator. Victoria's lawyer objected, something about hearsay, but even he sounded less sure of himself. Combined with the email and the neighbor's statement, Patel said, "This establishes a troubling pattern. Pressure, obfuscation, changes that benefited Victoria and Mark financially at the direct expense of the person Eleanor repeatedly identified as her intended heir." Mark slammed his palm on the table. "Enough," he snapped. "We're not criminals. We just did what made sense. Jamie doesn't even like old houses. They complain about their landlord every week." "I love this house," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "I loved her. This isn't about wallpaper or plumbing. It's about you two deciding your greed mattered more than her wishes." Victoria's shoulders sagged slightly, like some part of her armor had cracked. "Do you have any idea," she said, "how terrifying it is to be old and broke? To watch your mother's savings drain away while she insists on living in a museum?" I blinked. "So you stole the museum," I said. The mediator finally spoke. "Given the evidence presented, it's my professional opinion that this matter is unlikely to resolve fairly in this room alone," she said. "If we continue down this path, the next step will be formal litigation and potential investigation into financial exploitation." For the first time, Victoria looked genuinely afraid. In the end, we didn't get a tidy movie ending where a judge slams a gavel and hands me a set of keys. Real life is slower, messier, full of compromises that taste like ash and relief at the same time. Victoria's lawyer proposed a settlement. The house would be sold within 6 months, with debts and questionable equity draws accounted for under supervision. A substantial portion of the remaining proceeds would go into a trust in my name, managed by a neutral third party. Mark would keep his precious LLC but lose direct control over the property sale. There would be no criminal charges, but a formal finding of undue influence would appear in the probate record. I took a week to decide. I walked past Maple Street every evening, watching the sun hit the windows just right, remembering Eleanor at the sink humming Sinatra. Eventually, I realized something I wish I'd understood sooner. Even if I somehow won the house outright, it would never feel the same. The ghosts weren't just my grandparents anymore. They were all the signatures and lies baked into the walls. I signed the agreement. The sale went through. The check that eventually landed in my account was both life-changing and nowhere near what the house was worth. I used part of it to pay off debt, part to start a savings account with my name alone on it, and part to move into a slightly bigger apartment with enough light for plants. I cut contact with Mark completely. With Victoria, I set boundaries so firm they might as well be brick walls. We talk rarely about neutral things, like weather and whether my car still runs. I don't give her access to my finances, my documents, or my spare keys. Sometimes I miss the version of my family I thought I had. The one where promises meant something and heirlooms passed down like blessings instead of battlegrounds. But then I look at the single ivy plant on my windowsill, grown from a cutting I snuck from Eleanor's garden, and I remember that legacy can be something you tend yourself instead of something you're handed.